worst campaign for governor of Michigan ever? And who ran the best? How has the internet changed political reporting? And what kinds of ethical challenges do reporters face nowadays? 3 of the top political journalists in Michigan had the tables turned on them the other night, facing some tough questions themselves 3 weeks before the 2006 elections. The panel was called a Capitol event, this year's Zabrusky Lecture at Michigan State University. Pulitzer-Prize winner Eric Freedman and Emmy-winner Sue Carter, both of MSU School of Journalism, posed the questions to Ron Dzonkowski of the Detroit Free Press, Kathy Barks Hoffman of the Associated Press Lansing Bureau, and Charlie Cain of the Detroit News.
Of all the political campaigns you've covered, which campaign collectively did the best job communicating with the press, and which one did the worst?
I have to say Jeffrey Feiger probably did the worst job. Just because, Jeffrey really didn't have any kind of campaign. He had a campaign team, but it was basically, kind of Feiger and company. And he didn't like the media any more than he liked John Engler. I don't think he ever made any comments about the media having little, squiggly tails, or talking about our children in derogatory ways. But he definitely didn't. He put a lot of his own money into the campaign, but he didn't really have a campaign organization, so to speak. I don't know if you remember Charlie, but it seemed like every news conference he beat up on the media as much as he beat up on John Engler. I just remember going through the entire campaign with my jaw clenched. It was tense. I don't really remember enjoying it very much. Although Jeffrey Feiger could be very charming when he felt like being, but he wasn't being very charming in that campaign. The best, I don't know. I don't know. It might be Governor Granholm's this time in a way, just because her campaign team is really, we may be being manipulated, I don't know, but they are setting up, like weekly calls with the media to talk about what their strategy is. They've been having, reporters to sit down and talk about things, and so you're getting, it's not always for publication, but you're getting a lot of background, so you can kind of put things in context. I mean, we've thrown some tough questions at them. Let's face it. Boss was running millions of dollars of ads and doing really, really well. And so I remember at that point, and Chris DeWitt will probably testify to it, that we were, it's like, what in the heck are you guys thinking you're doing? So I don't know that it has been that especially well run from the standpoint of, any better or worse than any previous campaigns, but I certainly feel like we've been able to get at the people that are setting the strategy and doing the policy and asking questions that we want to ask.
Yeah, Feiger was, that was definitely the high water mark in a strange campaign. This is a guy that spent $5 million of his own money, and he started off by calling Engler and his lieutenant governor, Dick Posthumus, corn-fed Bowsers. And then he was surprised when Governor Engler refused to have even one debate with him, and there was little editorial outcry anywhere in the state because they all agreed that Feiger was such an off-the-wall guy that it wouldn't serve any useful purpose. You talk about reporting. The first time I met him, I knew who he was. I'd interviewed him by phone, but I was doing a TV show, and we were in the green room beforehand, and we started talking about age, and we ended up, I said, hey, I'm the same age you are. He goes, yeah, but you look it. Nice to meet you. I think the best campaign, and best is for a lot of different reasons. I think that the best campaign I saw in terms of reacting with the media was John Engler's campaign, the first one in 1990, when no one in the world thought that he could win, myself included. I would have mortgaged my house betting that there was no way he was going to beat Jim Blanchard. But what John Truscott, who was the campaign spokesperson, did is he made certain that he returned every single media phone call that he got. And there were a lot of campaigns. I can remember days when I'd write a story having to do at the governor's office, and I won't mention names, but I'd covered 2 governors before Blanchard, where you would say in the paper that the governor's office was unavailable for comment. I mean, that hasn't happened since John Engler came in, and it's continued throughout the Granholm. That hasn't happened. But it was, not that it was a great campaign, but the fact that the press secretary kept you involved and made certain he didn't call it a night until he had returned every single phone call that he got from the media.
It has changed enormously from the days when I first started covering campaigns and when you actually spent a lot more time chasing candidates around in person. And today, so much of it is done electronically and so much of it is done through television as opposed to in-person campaigning. And so many events are staged and there's so much less interaction, I think, between the reporters and the candidates than there was before. Everything is so orchestrated and scripted. I think we were counting after the last governor's debate, we sort of waited, and as soon as the host at Channel 7 said thank you and good night, it was 39 seconds before I had 3 emails from the DeVos campaign or the Republican campaign saying how well he'd done in the debate, talking points, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole operation has gotten so much faster. It turns on a dime these days. And I've actually been very impressed with the DeVos's campaign communication machinery to this point. And in terms of a campaign that quickly disappeared and stopped communicating, I'm recalling the Lucas campaign when he ran for governor against Jim Blanchard when Blanchard ran for re-election. And it was pretty clear that he was not going to do well, and the party sort of gave up on him and left him out to sort of do his own thing. And there just was not a lot of communication. And I think also the toughest guy that I have had to deal with, and editorial pages want to argue with people who come in to visit with them. John Engler was a very tough guy to argue with. He had been around and in every aspect of the system for so long that he just knew everything almost before you were going to ask it and had an answer ready to go off the top of his head. And I really marveled at his encyclopedic knowledge of policy and procedure. And I found him a very difficult guy to deal with in terms of, sort of playing the kind of journalism where you want to ask the tough questions. He had tougher answers than we had tougher questions.
Let's build on that question, and Charlie, let me start with you. Thoughts about the media and the PR in this year's governor's race, and then if you want to go to Senate and Congress as well.
Well, I agree. I think they've been very accommodating and providing answers to our questions. I mean, you don't necessarily get the answers you're looking for. Sometimes they reinvent what the question is. And I see Chris DeWitt over here, who's the Governor Granholm's campaign press secretary. We have a standing joke in the office that if we throw out 9 phone calls, we all know who the last phone call back is going to be. But Chris always gets back before deadline.
Last is best.
No, I think they're both doing a good job and making good use of multimedia, and it's been a good campaign in that regard.
Thoughts about the Senate race?
It's been sort of overwhelmed by the governor's race. I think the governor's race has sort of sucked all the political oxygen out of the room, and the Senate race, unfortunately, has not gotten the kind of attention that it probably should get because, whoever you're for, the way it sort of works in Michigan and most other states, if right now Debbie Stabenow is completing her first term. If she wins the second term, she basically is probably in for life.
She's got a lot on it. And talk about sucking the oxygen out of the political atmosphere. Is the same holding true for Congress?
Well, except for, and everybody knew going in on the primary race between incumbent Joe Schwartz and Tim Walberg. Everyone knew that was the race, and once you got beyond that, the way that the lines were drawn after the last census, you knew that it was going to be a 9-6, Republican majority, and that's not going to change. So, I mean, the Michigan incumbent congressmen are definitely not endangered species.
Ron, same question to you. Thoughts about this year's PR/media in the governor's race and then all through the others?
I think I would agree with Charlie that often the questions are not answered in the way that they are asked. In other words, they immediately go to the spin, and they have canned and pat answers. But I think the other issue that's been a little troubling about this campaign is that Michigan, as a state, is facing so many very, very serious issues. And those have been glossed over, not glossed over, but they've been overshadowed by the personal nastiness between the two candidates and the sort of gotcha politics that you see in the campaign and the attack ads. And I don't think that this state, which needs a thoughtful and serious and forward-thinking discussion of the issues, has had it in this campaign.
Kathy, has this been a particularly nasty campaign?
Yeah, it has been. I agree with both Ron and Charlie that both campaigns have been fairly, they have employed so many means to reach out. I mean, you may have gotten those emails in 39 seconds, but we got them they had them handed out before we could even get out of the press room and into the studio to see the candidates after the debate. And so they're very well prepared. They have points, counterpoints. I mean, they not only have, my candidate won, which they wrote up in advance, but they already have come up. They've been having somebody sit there and listen to the entire debate, and they have rebutted every one of the opponent's points. And they're citing things. I mean, it isn't just, well, that's just a bunch of malarkey. They're like, this fact is untrue, and they cite the Detroit News or the Free Press or the, some other news article that backs up their point. And they have that ready to hand you at the end of the debate. So somebody's obviously been sitting at a laptop listening to things and pulling things together as the debate goes along. I mean, it's just instantaneous. That doesn't even count all the website, the fact that we can see the ads now. Anybody can see the ads on the web. You don't have to wait for them to show up on your morning TV news, although we all know we're inundated there as well. But you can see them there. There's blogs to read now. I mean, there's MichiganLiberal.com to read if you want to have the liberal point of view. There's LunchBucketConservative.com if you want the conservative point of view, or Solonus's blog for the Michigan Republican Party. They just send this out. They're constantly commenting on each other. One of the things I've noticed is the Senate race is just overwhelming. My mailbox at work fills up with email constantly, because not only does the Bouchard campaign send things out, but the National Republican Senatorial Committee sends out exactly the same thing. And then there's another group that'll, be about Do Nothing Debbie that comes out. And they just keep sending the same thing, basically. They repackage it a little bit. But I'll get 3 emails on every point that Mike Bouchard wants to make, and they'll send out, there'll be a dozen a day. And so I think partly the Senate race has been overshadowed, but I think because Mike Bouchard has been behind as far as raising money and things like that, he has been looking for as much free media as he can get. So that's why you had the chicken suits and showing up with the duck at Stabenow headquarters, who's ducking debates. They tried to get 3 days worth of news coverage out of that. In fact, they're still talking about debates. They had a news conference. They had a call-in conference on that again today, and about her ads and. That's the other thing, teleconferences. Everybody wants to talk to you by teleconference, and they'll schedule one at the drop of a hat. So, you can't really plan your coverage very well. We're trying to still do issue stories and profiles of the candidates and all the things that we usually do in a race, but every single day you're trying to fend off this onslaught of message coming at you and sort through what needs to be covered, what doesn't need to be covered, what's new, what's old, what are they just trying to get free media on that really, finally, my line in the sand is, does this help the voter? If it doesn't help the voter, we're not going to cover it. That's just my personal standard, and that's what I'm making the people in my office do. I don't know whether it's right or wrong or indifferent, but there's so much of this blathering and snarking back and forth that goes on that after a while you have to say enough. Writing about that does not help the voter at this point. We're not going to write about that. And that's kind of what I've gotten down to, because like I said, you're trying to swim in just this ocean of stuff coming at you every day.
Thank you. Charlie, you and I started covering governor's races in state capitals about the same time, and since we both have gray hair, we know that was a long time ago. So far, we've been mostly talking about how the candidates and their campaigns have been slanting, spinning, selling. What changes are you seeing in the way the press corps covers campaigns? Are reporters more skeptical, more easily manipulated, more gullible? Do they have more resources to cover stories in depth rather than react to the kinds of situations that Kathy was just describing? Or media organizations cutting back on the resources, leaving the journalists to scramble?
I think that there's definitely more skepticism, some cynicism today than existed back when we started this. But you and I both got in before Watergate. So that sort of changed the perceived role of the media.
You guys had to rent horses to cover candidates.
There was politics before Watergate.
Yeah. No, but I think there was that cynicism that everybody decided they could go out and they could be the next Woodward Bernstein and fell all the bad guys. I think that news holes have shrunk dramatically in the last 30 years, and the amount of space that you're giving to day-to-day coverage is definitely diminished. we used to go out, we'd go on the campaign trail every day and we'd be writing, what happened yesterday for tomorrow's paper. You don't see that now. You pick your shots. You figure there's maybe 6 issues, or we're going to do something on crime, we're going to do something on healthcare, we're going to do something on jobs, and something on the environment. And you pick your day and you zero in on that. The rest of it, you're following, obviously, debates. I think we're relying more on polls for better or worse today than 30 years ago. But I think also that we don't have the same sort of audience in newspapers that we had 30 years ago. I mean, with all of the various ways you can get your news now, from specialty publications to the internet to blogs or whatever, it's a different audience. So it's changed a lot. I still think it's a lot of fun covering it.
Ron, have you seen changes in your 30 years?
Yeah, and understand too that I'm from an editorial page now, and so we come at issues a little differently. And what we generally will do is say, okay, what are the issues that we think are the most important to Michigan, and what does this candidate say about this issue? What has this candidate or office holder done about this issue? And so we frame our coverage a little differently than just covering the news. But the other thing that's happened, well, Charlie talks about the fact that news whole has shrunk. That is, the size of newspapers has shrunk in the room that they have for news content. The availability of information has exploded, absolutely exploded because of the internet. And the other thing that the internet has made possible is that anybody who has an opinion about anything, whether it's grounded in fact or not, can throw it out there, and somebody finds it and picks up on it, and the next thing you know, you've got either a rumor or an unsubstantiated claim or a nugget of news that's pretty significant that you've got to chase and pursue. So there is a lot more that you have to keep track of, and a lot more ability for average citizen, private citizen, somebody who only has an agenda, to be heard. I mean, the world has become sort of speaker's corner. And anybody can stand up and be heard today through the wonders of the internet. And in many ways, it's sort of a blessing and a curse because it gives rise to a lot of stuff that is fundamentally unfounded or not rooted in fact or is inaccurate. And it causes people in what is the mainstream media, or however you want to describe us, takes a lot of time and resources to check some of this stuff out and run it down. But in all of that stuff that's out there, there is the occasional nugget that can turn a campaign quickly. I mean, if you think about what the Swift Boat veterans did to John Kerry in that campaign, that was almost entirely begun on the internet, and it started in internet circles, and it went from there. Say what you want about whether it was accurate or not, it was effective, and it made a huge difference in that campaign, and that's one of the big differences today. Anybody can be heard on anything. It's just a question of whether you want to listen.
Kathy, AP has always been on deadline 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now you have competition, not from United Press International, not from the traditional old kind of wire services, but from exactly the kinds of multi-sources that Ron's been talking about: blogs, electronic newsletters, email alerts. How do you compete?
We just, quite frankly, keep doing the same things we've been doing. I mean, we file fast, we file often. We still try to be first when we can be first. The good part is I can see what Charlie has written, or I can see what's going on at the Detroit Free Press, because they now want to be on the web as soon as they can as well. Sometimes, the AP story will be what's on their websites first, and we're always happy about that. But, if something else breaks and they've picked up something on their own and they're ahead of us on something, well, I know about it pretty darn quickly, because they want to put it on the web because they want to be ahead too. So, in a way, it's more competition because, like you said, we've been always kind of out there just because we always had a news cycle we were filing for, and I've been in newspapers too for 15 years before I went to the AP, and boy, it was nice to just have that. You had to have it in by the end of the day so they could put it in the paper the next day. Those were the good old days, weren't they? You don't have that anymore, and so it keeps us on our toes, but it also, I think, gives us all a little bit more reassurance sometimes, because you can see, well, okay, what's happening over here, and we know about, we see what each other is doing a lot faster than waiting for things to show up in the paper the next day.